there is a point where we're going to run out of liquid supply of Bitcoin. We're getting to that point, there's no doubt.
Do you think we'll see like other big corporations adopt like a Bitcoin treasury strategy?
I think it's inevitable. I think there was a rumor out there, which I find very believable, that Nintendo are now looking at buying Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And they have, I think, $14 billion on the balance sheet. Owning Bitcoin is like owning a winning lottery ticket, knowing the numbers are going to come in, but they haven't come in yet. Take agency, take responsibility, do the work. Bitcoin is the path of responsibility. It's taking responsibility and agency for your own life, understanding deeply what this thing is and how this leads to a path of freedom and peace.
This time we tried to record, I asked on X, do you have any questions for Richard? And this one came up, and I think you'll like it, which is, you are the CEO of Strategy. What are your next moves?
It's funny you ask that, because, we're part of, I'm pretty sure you're part of the group on Twitter, Responsibly Long MicroStrategy, or MSTR. And there's a lot of whining in that group about, Saylor's hitting the ATM too hard, he's selling too much stock, and, I think not having enough impact on Bitcoin when he's buying it. I was thinking about this a lot, and obviously, this whole game is a patience game. Like, at the end of the day, Saylor's goal is to accumulate as much Bitcoin as is humanly possible. And I think, we're now getting to the point where there's an inflection point coming. There's the supply shock definitely coming. We're close, right? You have, I think, nation states across the world trying to assess whether or not the Bitcoin is the right thing to be holding on the balance sheet now that the US has announced a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Obviously, Saylor's doing a lot of work out there in public talking about it, and you've got MetaPlanet and other companies now starting to do this too. So there is a point where we're going to run out of liquid supply of Bitcoin. We're getting to that point, there's no doubt. If you look at exchange supply, it's dropped in the last 4 years from, I think, 3.5 million Bitcoin on exchanges to about 2.2 million today. So you've had 1.3 million taken off exchanges in the last 4 years, at the same time that you've had issuance of about 1.05 or 1.1 million Bitcoin. So 2.2 to 2.3 million Bitcoin's been taken out of supply, which is, it's 2 times the issuance amount of that last period, right? So we're getting to the point where, that sort of liquidity of supply is going to just go, we need to ratchet higher on the price.
Mm-hmm. And long-term holder percentage 1 year is 63%, I believe.
Well, there you go. That's an all-time high as well.
Not being moved. Yeah, and I think 2 years is also like 50% plus.
Yeah. So when you put all that together, I think that Saylor's strategy so far has been the right one. Now, I've been toying with the idea of whether or not for the next phase of when we hit that illiquid supply, or sort of the point where there's just no more Bitcoin on exchanges, no more Bitcoin on OTC desks, should Saylor actually buy Bitcoin really carelessly? As in, not try and buy it through OTC desks, not try and buy it with zero impact, and actually just buy it with the intention of massively ramping the price. Because what will happen then is you'll have an MNAV expansion, because MSTR is the thing that people go to when they want leverage on Bitcoin. And when Bitcoin starts to run, people want leverage on Bitcoin. So what will then happen is he'll get a much bigger MNAV, maybe 3, 4, even 6 to 10 times as we get really rampant. And the Bitcoin price will be pulled along with it, which means that he can massively, accretively dilute more than he's able to now by just irresponsibly buying Bitcoin. It's something I've been thinking about. Are you following what I'm saying?
Yeah. So you feel like he's too careful in a sense. So he's in a rush, but he's careful.
I'm not saying that he's being too careful. I think strategically it's the right thing to do until you hit that point where there's no more Bitcoin, right? When there's no more Bitcoin, you may as well just go, aggressive buying, because what happens is it will just ramp the price. It will massively increase his MNAV, which means his dilution will become much more accretive. So he doesn't actually really care how high the price of Bitcoin is when he's buying it, because all he should care about is his MNAV. Mm-hmm. And if his MNAV is pushing much higher, then actually it's much more beneficial to his shareholders.
Yeah.
Right. And it's only going to be able to sustain that level if there's not a huge free float of Bitcoin floating about. So at the point where things are getting less liquid, maybe he should try for a period of just going super aggressive, super careless buying, market impact all across, and just push the price higher. So I don't know. I mean, thinking about it lately, and I had a feeling you're going to ask me that question. So I was just thinking about that could be an interesting strategy for the next phase.
It's interesting, I think, because if the MNAV goes up, his leverage also goes up, in the sense that, you know, he can borrow more. He would need more to buy the same amount of Bitcoin as the price runs up. But as you're talking through it, I'm thinking that this would also induce more FOMO, right? Like there would be a competition as between, and we'll talk about that in a bit, you know, more companies that perhaps then only realize, you know, when the price is like 250K, okay, this is something I need to do as well, you know, and they would try to issue debt, for example. Like that whole market would become extremely competitive, I'd say, at that time.
Yeah, and I think that it would be beneficial in multiple areas, because to your point, if you're watching the rampant move of MicroStrategy as another company's CEO, and who's been hesitating about this. And there are companies out there, particularly in Japan, funnily enough, and we often talk about MetaPlanet in the same breath as we talk about MicroStrategy these days, but Japan has a huge amount of zombie companies sitting on huge pools of cash. So I remember when I was a trader in Japan, like the price to cash ratio would often be 1 or 1.3 times. So basically, you could buy the company for the cash that they have on the balance sheet almost. You could then convert that cash into Bitcoin, get a multiple, and suddenly you're off to the races creating another MetaPlanet. There's plenty of companies out there in Japan like that are sitting on these slow cash flow generative businesses that are pretty boring, that have very low price to cash ratios. And I wonder if, again, thinking as the CEO of strategy, maybe you want to go on an acquisitive strategy of buying companies with huge amount of cash on the balance sheet and then applying essentially your multiple to the NAV by immediately converting that cash into Bitcoin.
And we'll get to our activities on LinkedIn, talking to other financial professionals on LinkedIn. But I have to think about one argument that I've seen a lot, and you just mentioned zombie companies, right? People are saying like, "Oh, this buying Bitcoin as a zombie company is not a strategy, you know, or something like that." Like they think it's a stupid strategy, and they already think Bitcoin is stupid, right? But what I'm thinking is actually, you know, it's especially the zombie companies, like the zombie country, I almost want to say like El Salvador, right? That just understand, like, I don't really have any options, and this is my way out to actually become, I want to say, diligent again, right? Like if you are flushed with cash and you have a running company, you have the illusion of being able to use that cash for, let's say, sustainable or diligent growth, right? And Saylor has talked a lot about, well, but if you use the cash for like stock buybacks or some acquisitions and stuff, like, are you actually putting it towards growth of the company?
Look, I think, first of all, you mentioned these people on LinkedIn who are criticizing everything about Bitcoin. And I think if you're still criticizing Bitcoin at this point, then you really haven't taken the time and you're not credible. I think that is a separate debate whether or not buying Bitcoin for your balance sheet as a zombie company is a good thing to do. And I think you make a very good point that if you're a CEO of a zombie company, much like Michael Saylor was, where you're sitting there with a low cash generating business that sort of the market cap hasn't moved in years, you're kind of stuck, and you're not able. There's something in your life that's not working right. This is your baby. It was his baby, and it's not quite doing what it should be doing.
Bitcoin custody is evolving, and OnRamp is leading this change with multi-institution custody, eliminating single points of failure. Instead of relying on one institution, OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a cold storage multi-sig vault backed by 3 independent custodians, where no single party can move your funds alone, providing an unprecedented level of security. Your assets are protected by a 100 million Lloyd's of London insurance policy, with all transactions fully auditable on-chain and only executed at your direction. This means complete transparency and control over your assets at all times. Beyond custody, OnRamp provides comprehensive Bitcoin services that include trading, lending, inheritance planning, and IRAs. You can view them as your private Bitcoin banking partner tailored to your wealth preservation goals. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or an experienced holder, OnRamp's approach helps you secure your generational wealth with unmatched security and peace of mind. You can sign up at onrampbitcoin.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to receive $150 in Bitcoin after your first deposit. If you first want to learn more, you can also book a free consultation via their website to speak with one of their Bitcoin custody experts. Tell them you came through me, and they'll take extra good care of you. Bitcoin is financial sovereignty, so why compromise when you need liquidity? Meet Debify, the Bitcoin-backed lending platform made by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Debify connects you to institutional-grade liquidity and allows you to borrow fiat or stablecoins, all while keeping your Bitcoin 100% under your control with a non-custodial 3 out of 4 multi-sig escrow solution. Get competitive rates from a global marketplace of institutional-grade lenders, with loan terms that you choose, from 1 month up to a year. There are no hidden fees and there is no rehypothecation, just pure Bitcoin-aligned lending with the highest level of transparency and security. Are you ready to unlock liquidity without ever selling a single sat? Go to debify.com/Bram, that's BRAM, to check out their current lending offers. That's debify.com/Bram.
And I think if you can then make a move to Bitcoin, which can completely transform your company, put it on a multiplier where you can start arbitraging this lie system, this system of lies, which is basically fiat, right? I mean, I'm in the process of making a Bitcoin 101 presentation for a board to explain how Bitcoin works. And because, the constant feedback that you will get when you're talking to people that, sit in governance positions, sit in traditional finance, that, Bitcoin is a speculative asset, is what they always say. And when you compare it to fiat, where essentially it's, there's no supply limitation, that it's completely printed outside the control of anybody else. There's 6 guys in a room in the US that basically decide the fate of the US dollar, and no one else has input. And, maybe they'll tell a few of their hedge fund buddies who are running macro funds that get an early look, and so they manage to do a trade. I mean, this is just a system of unfairness and dishonesty and theft and grift. And then you have the comparative system, which is an algorithm which is completely fixed. Everybody knows what is going to happen. Everybody knows what is going to happen down to a 10-minute schedule, essentially, of the time chain that is Bitcoin, and that is truth. And so when you compare these two systems and you're able to say, okay, I can arbitrage this system, borrow money in this system, and put it into this system of truth and focus and propel my company into a profitable company that is able to, continuously add value to shareholders, then that changes everything for you, and you start to get aligned with this value system of truth. And I think this is something that you and I obviously talk about a lot within our discussions, where Bitcoin is truth and Bitcoin leads you to truth. And if you're leading a zombie company where you're, struggling every single board meeting to come up with ideas of how you can move the company in a direction towards growth, because that's what your shareholders are demanding. But you actually have this nuclear reactor, as Saylor calls it, of Bitcoin volatility that is suddenly supercharging your company and allowing you to do that. Then, of course, you're open to all the various different opportunities that come with that. And, like I said, you could become an acquisitive company that goes around buying companies with huge amounts of cash on their balance sheet so that you can then convert it into this much more powerful system that is powered by Bitcoin.
Yeah, I'm interested to learn how the people will react to your presentation. Must be interesting to have those discussions.
Yeah, I have it in a week, so I'll let you know how it goes.
Okay.
But it's happening more and more. More and more companies are trying to understand what it is that MicroStrategy are doing. They're trying to understand what Bitcoin is fundamentally. And then they want to say, okay, how could we implement a strategy like this? And they can't do that without all the board members understanding what Bitcoin is. Because if you're still dismissing Bitcoin and saying it's a scam or it's a speculative asset, then you clearly haven't understood it. And so when they're seeing now, I think it's 70 companies across the world have now implemented some level of Bitcoin's treasury, and all have had massive accretive returns on their price as a result, then you have to say, okay, maybe I'm wrong about this. Now, obviously, the most highly egotistical people will not. They'll continue, being on your LinkedIn comments saying that Bitcoin's a scam and how could you possibly believe in this? You're an idiot and I'm so smart. And
I have a PhD.
I've been watching this for 20 years, even though it was discovered 15 years ago. And
exactly.
I know all about Bitcoin, and it's clearly a scam. So
well, but before we move on to the next part where we'll also talk about that, I wanted to touch upon one thing. Of course, Saylor is yelling this from the rooftops, right? Like free presentations, free toolkits for companies. He's spending his time with other people. For example, Ryan Cohen from GameStop. I think it's necessary, just narrative-wise, it's necessary that he helps other big company CEOs understand this value. So, the value of adopting Bitcoin, so that he's not going to stay like the crazy one guy shouting in the desert. Even though there's of course 70 companies now, but if we think about, do you think we'll see like other big corporations adopt like a Bitcoin treasury strategy? I think we have GameStop incoming-ish. Something is going to happen, but we've seen Saylor talk to Jeff Bezos. We've seen him talk to Michael Dell. We've seen Michael Dell actually tweet, Cookie Monster Bitcoin type, memes, which I thought was very interesting. Zuckerberg is into Bitcoin. He has majority voting rights. We saw Saylor with some Apple in a picture. What are your thoughts around, big serious companies actually adopting a Bitcoin strategy?
I think it's inevitable. I think Saylor's extremely credible when you put him in front of a board and, have him explain and answer questions. Obviously, I think I told you that I once introduced him to the former president of Argentina. It was absolutely a phenomenal discussion. He basically sat down and he said, look, I've got half an hour. What do you want to know about? And, we sort of said, okay, Mr. Macri President Macri wants to understand how Bitcoin can be accretive to business in Argentina. Saylor just went for half an hour, just, giving a diatribe. And I've obviously seen him on hundreds of podcasts, but seeing him do it in that very clear, focused way in response to that very specific question to the former president was very impressive. And I think he's obviously doing this work all over the place, as you say, Ryan Cohen. I'm sure that he's been called into some of the Mag 7's boards to present. Obviously, he did that presentation to MicroStrategy. I think he put a bit too much content in that presentation for a 3-minute presentation. I mean, if the board had invited him in to speak separately, then obviously they would have taken a bit more time than 3 minutes. And so I think that's happening in the background. But the message is very clear and it's very strong. And I think, I'll say it again. If you're a company sitting on cash, then you do have this problem. I mean, it's very clear. The Trump administration are doing everything to devalue the dollar currently, make the US more competitive in every single aspect of what they're doing. So if you're sitting there with a bunch of US dollar treasuries or US dollars on your balance sheet, then you know the direction of travel for that currency. We've known it as Bitcoiners for a long time, right? Every single fiat currency is getting devalued in favor of just sort of forward pulling growth forward. Into economies that are essentially stagnant.
Yes.
Europe, very clearly is a stagnant economy. And so if you're sitting on a bunch of euros on your balance sheet, it might look good for the last week against US dollars, but trajectory is just one way.
Yeah.
So I think more and more these companies are starting to understand that there's something here that actually, if you implement the MicroStrategy playbook, you can even further leverage this because you're early and get yourself into a position where you become a titan in your particular industry. And, that then puts you on very solid footing to be acquisitive in your industry, or, as I said before, to other cash heavy companies. And as I said, I think Japan really is the domain of cash heavy companies. It's the land of that. Metaplanet have shown the playbook for Japanese companies, and more are paying attention. I think there were 2 Japanese companies that announced recently that they were going to be implementing a Bitcoin standard as well. So it was obvious that Metaplanet couldn't do a 2,800% increase in their stock in a single year and not have people pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to get that more and more. And there are really, Japan is the land of zombie companies. So I think it's going to become huge in Japan.
I think that's a nice leeway into the next section that we really wanted to talk about. I love that you mentioned time chain and the truth and the fact that we're early, because I think what I love so much about Bitcoin is that literally all the information is out there. Even within this money technology, you can verify it for yourself, right? So you don't have to believe us when we are talking about it, right? Like all the podcasts and all the conversations are more an invitation for anyone listening to verify this for themselves. And so if Bitcoin is an asymmetric opportunity based on publicly available information, how are we still at 88K-ish today?
Oh, yeah, that is the question. I remember in 2019, I remember doing a podcast with Anthony Scaramucci, and we were both being interviewed, and we were laughing about how we couldn't believe that Bitcoin wasn't already $100,000. It's so clearly worth. Back then, it was so clearly worth 100,000. Today, I look at it and I'm like, why is it not $1 million? It is so obvious to me at this point. It's so obvious to anybody that studies it that this is inevitable. I think in a funny kind of way, that gives you a huge amount of peace, right? Because you know that you can buy something that is worth significantly more than it is priced at today. And I think that it doesn't matter if you or I go out there and buy, even $1 million worth of Bitcoin, it's going to have zero impact, right? So there's no need for us to try and hide the information so that we can get a head start on everybody else. You can just keep accumulating, keep buying every week with whatever you have. And I recommend this to people all the time, just even if you can buy $50 worth a week, just do that, because then you've got your savings program and you're moving towards this sort of inevitability. People, I've seen this post on Twitter a few times, but owning Bitcoin is like owning a winning lottery ticket, knowing the numbers are going to come in, but they haven't come in yet.
Yeah.
And I think that that's actually a very perfect synopsis of what this is. Like, if you've done the work, you know what it is. So that gives you a nice feeling of peace, but it also gives you the ability to follow your own truth. And I think, you know, I mean, I'm not a religious person, so to speak, but I've become much more spiritual. You and I, in our very first conversation, started talking about Bitcoin and consciousness and all of that. And I think that the truth element of Bitcoin ends up leading you towards wanting to have truth in every aspect of your life. It makes you a very unemployable person because you're not willing to play politics. You're only interested in the truth. Like, you know, this is a stupid idea, guys. We're not going to do this. Like,
and that's okay. And that's okay. You know?
That's okay. Yeah, exactly. So you end up gravitating much more towards truth. And I think that is just a result of always being focused on this truth protocol and realizing that it's the truth element of it that is actually making you a happier person, because you're sitting there going, okay, I know that my family's going to be okay because I've, you know, continued to buy, and I will continue to buy Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's worth $1 million, but somehow I'm able to buy it today at 88,000.
Yeah.
Well, that's just a fantastic situation. If I ever told you almost 99.9% guarantee that you could buy something that would 10x over the next 2 to 3 years, you'd be elated to have that sort of secret information, but it's not secret information. If you're out there and you do the work, you understand that that's where we're going. It's inevitable.
You just said, you know, Bitcoin is inevitable, and this is exactly the question that I wanted to ask. You know, how do you think about that inevitability? Does it stem more from what I just said, like the systemic part, and also I'd say the economic necessity, because there is a money that's being devalued all the time, right? Like that eventually has an end that will blow up, like many examples in our past? Or do you think it's more like a philosophical alignment with human values, like people want freedom, they want trustlessness, or is it maybe a combination?
The inevitability of Bitcoin is really about what it's compared to, right? So, you know, I run the hedge fund advisory business here in Syz Capital. And we have lots of accounts, and, you know, these people, they're like, okay, which currency should I be sat in? You know, because they've got dollar exposure to the hedge funds that they're invested in, and, you know, maybe some euro exposure. And they're like, I don't want euros, I want Swiss francs. And so they're always talking about where they're hedging. Once you pull yourself out of that system and you go, okay, that system is designed to just completely devalue over time. Like, there's no limit to the amount of paper that can be printed where you're storing your value, versus Bitcoin, which is completely verifiably scarce, as you say, every 10 minutes, verified, continuously across the network. And every single 10 minutes, it just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Whereas, you know, when you're trying to compare that to US dollar or even Swiss franc, which is probably the best of the nonsense fiat currencies, you know, it's not even a comparison. It's not even a comparison, but Bram was so early. And it comes back to your original question about the 88,000. Why are we here? Well, I'll give you another example. I was driving to work this morning, and I have multiple chats with various different groups where I've spent time educating them on Bitcoin over the period. And there's a group in Switzerland of women who are, you know, middle-aged, you know, but their husbands have always looked after the finance. And so they want to understand aspects of finance. And so they do this group. There's like 20, 25 women, and they pull in someone to speak every couple of weeks about a specific aspect of traditional finance, including Bitcoin. So 3 years ago, I went to them and I spoke about Bitcoin. And I said, ignore every other cryptocurrency. Sell any other cryptocurrency that you might have and buy Bitcoin. And, you know, the question inevitably came out, oh, what about Ethereum? So I explained why Ethereum was going to, fail over time and depreciate against Bitcoin in the long term. And so I'll continuously post stuff into this chat. And I think yesterday I'd posted something about how Bitcoin, I think it was BitPain on Twitter, had posted that in November, last time we were at 88,000, Bitcoin 88,000, Ethereum was at 2,700 or something. And today we're back at 88,000 and Ethereum's at 1,500. So Ethereum's lost like over 50% of its value in the last 5 months. So I posted this on the chat and someone came back on the chat and said, do you think now that Bitcoin's starting to decouple and outperform that it would be a good time for me, and bear in mind, I've been talking to these ladies for 3 years about Bitcoin. It would be a good time for me to sell my Ethereum and buy Bitcoin. And I'm like, how do I even respond to that question? Like, I've been telling you for 3 years, sell all your Ethereum, buy Bitcoin, because Bitcoin, at least its truth, right? And this is the point. It's back to this ego test. It's this truth, right? It's all the same thing. It all keeps bringing you back to the same thing. Bitcoin is an ego test. You have to be able to admit, okay, there's something here that I don't understand. Mm-hmm. I want to dig further.
Yes.
And so I'm prepared to go into it and start to ask myself questions that might be uncomfortable. Do I really need to diversify my portfolio? Do I really need to buy 10 other cryptos to diversify against Bitcoin? Or do I just dig deeper and deeper and understand that this is the only thing that is real truth in a sea of assets that are complete nonsense, right? I mean, even NVIDIA, which, has been the darling of Mag 7 stocks for the last year and a half, you have no idea what's going to happen with the leadership of that company. They could do something fraudulent tomorrow, start stealing money, and all of a sudden, you've got a failed company as a result. Bitcoin is truth. Nothing can be changed in that protocol, and that's the test. If you're willing to just say, okay, I'm going to do the work, I'm going to really go deep on this. Once you understand it, then there's no other question in your mind. It's inevitable. Of course, it's a gift at 88,000 because it's worth at least $1 million today. So, I'm kind of answering a lot of the questions with that example, I guess, but you need to be able to just break it all down and just say, okay, why am I selling all my Ethereum? Why is Richard telling me sell all my Ethereum?
Yeah.
Is there something truth, or is he just someone who wants to pump his own bags in Bitcoin? Because I had that, by the way, and I did a traditional finance podcast recently.
Of course.
And the comments are hilarious. They're like, Bitcoin scammer, this, that, the other negative about Bitcoin. And you're like, we're so early.
Yeah.
People just cannot accept that Bitcoin might be something different to the way that they see it, the lens that they see the universe through, which is, well, obviously it's too good to be true. Obviously it's a scam. And projecting maybe to some degree their own behavior on.
Let's talk about something that not a lot of people think about before it's too late. Where are you storing your Bitcoin seed words? Are they truly secure? I found my solution with StampSeed. It's an elegant all-in-one titanium plate solution with no separate pieces to lose or manage. Your seed phrase gets permanently stamped into pure titanium that withstands fire, survives water, and lasts for generations. Unlike shallow etching methods, StampSeed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, protecting your financial legacy. When you order a titanium seed plate from StampSeed, you can also upload a custom design or your logo to customize the back of your plate to make it fully personalized. Paper seed phrases are a disaster waiting to happen. Secure your Bitcoin with StampSeed for decades to come. Visit stampseed.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to get 15% off your order. Literally today, I got a voice message from a friend. He lives in Bali. He had 3 homes, 2 that he was like renting out. He sold it. He sold all his Ethereum, all his Solana. And then he just texted me, I'm all in on Bitcoin. Like, I live in a home and I'm all in on Bitcoin, And I woke up this morning. This is what he literally sent me today. He said, I woke up this morning feeling free. I didn't even watch the news. I didn't even watch the fucking stocks. Like, I understand now what you've been talking about. And of course,
Beautiful.
of course I would say that as someone who's into Bitcoin, like I hear the critics, but it's fine. I think Bitcoin is a mirror, and we will show that over time we are happier, more spiritual, more free in our minds than the people that are trapped in fiat money, playing the fiat money game. Again, without saying it from a place of judgment, it's more that, you can only show what the benefit is to us if we just really live it, right? Like, it's just like,
You and I often talk about spirituality and all these sorts of things that are related to Bitcoin, and truth being one of them. I mean, the truth shall set you free, right? Aligning your values with the truth is very important. But there's another aspect, right? Is taking responsibility for your life. More often than not, when I first start talking to someone about Bitcoin, they'll say, is now a good time to buy Bitcoin? It's like, the minute you ask me that question, you don't understand Bitcoin well enough, and you need to take responsibility for your life. You don't want to give me the responsibility, right? Why would you want to give me the responsibility to make decisions in your life?
Yeah.
Right? Is now a good time to buy
under
Bitcoin?
The assumption that you will do everything according to what I want, right? So if I give that responsibility away, I still think that other human that's taking on that responsibility will not misuse that or corrupt that. Right? It's kind of ignorant in a sense.
Well, it leads you to a path of victimhood. This is the problem. Like, there are two ways always with everything in life. And I believe very strongly that agency and self-responsibility is the path to freedom and happiness. Whereas victimhood is the complete diametric opposite. It's probably one of the lowest energy frequencies is victimhood. Oh, my life is so bad. Richard told me to buy Bitcoin and I lost a load of money. No, wrong. I'm not going to buy Bitcoin because I don't trust Richard. And that should be the way that you operate. It should be, I want to trust myself.
Yes.
I want to say, okay, if I want to trust myself, how do I trust myself to make the right decision? I need to do the work. I need to do the study. As you said early on in this podcast, you said there's so much information out there. I'm able to take agency if I want it. So take agency, take responsibility, do the work, understand it. That's why Michael Saylor, he always talks about do 10,000 hours of study or 1,000 hours of study. Because if you study it for 1,000 hours, you're going to understand what it is and you're never going to want to learn anything else. Right?
Agreed.
So take agency, take the path of happiness rather than, oh, should I buy it now? The shortcut, which will lead you to victimhood. Because when it goes down 50%, oh, Richard told me to buy it. Or Bram told me to buy it. I hate Bram. What an asshole. Right? He lost me money. It's like, no, you've got to take responsibility because that's the path of happiness. And by the way, this is all linked. It's all linked. Bitcoin is the path of responsibility. It's taking responsibility and agency for your own life, is doing the work, understanding deeply what this thing is and how this leads to a path of freedom and peace in your heart. Because you realize, my God, I'm buying something at a 90% discount to fair value.
Is this one of your biggest discoveries on the spiritual path that you were put on, or realizations, or was there anything else? Like what really clicked for you in that spiritual journey that Bitcoin also invites you to?
Yeah, I mean, I had a difficult period of my life in 2018 to 2021. And it was a period through which I became a Bitcoin maximalist. But as a conflict within that Bitcoin maximalism, I was running a crypto company. So I was the CEO of a NASDAQ listed crypto company. Our main business was exchange. We had a fund, we had a custodian, and I was all the time becoming more and more a Bitcoin maximalist. So the exchange team would come to me, say, okay, we want to list XRP on the exchange. I was like, okay, that's a bullshit token. We're not listing that. And in fact, we need to delist everything else. And that was a very difficult period for me because I had a complete misalignment of my values with what I was doing in my career. I didn't believe it any longer. And so fortunately, I got to a point in the end of 2021 where I was able to just, because I'd completely fallen out of alignment with the board. They wanted to do a deal with Binance and sell the company to Binance. I was like, you know what? That's what you do. And I don't want to be any part of it any longer. And I stepped down, and it was perfect for me as a person. But I came out of that period of 3 years, where I had to just go and sit on a beach. I went to Costa Rica, and I had to just recover from this period of being completely misaligned with my values, or as my values were shifting, realizing that I was completely misaligned. And I think that was the beginning of how Bitcoin became very spiritual for me, because, you know, I had time to just sit back and process and think about why I was so unhappy and miserable in my life for that period. I'd been away from my kids who were living in Switzerland. I was living in Hong Kong. It was COVID. You couldn't travel. It was a complete nightmare. I didn't see, my kids for 2 months, 3 months at a time. It was awful. And every time I did travel, my chairman and board would be like, why are you leaving Hong Kong? And because the company wasn't doing so well. It was a difficult time for any company, obviously, during COVID. And so it was very difficult. But I think it really opened my eyes. It really opened my eyes to how misaligned I'd be. And then that made me so resolute that for the next phase of my career, I would have complete alignment. And I would just not want to work with anybody that I wasn't aligned with. And now I'm in a very fortunate position where I work at Syz Capital. Mark Syz is a very good old friend, and also a Bitcoiner, and someone that I'm very aligned with in terms of the way that I think about things. I would say that for me, it was a real spiritual awakening. 2022 it was a year of really just opening my eyes to how I'd been running for 3 years away, not in the direction of where I wanted to be going. And I think that, that's why I always talk about Bitcoin helping you align with your truth and your values. And the more that you align with your values, and you and I have talked about this in your career as well, it's like you're now running the perfect career because you're speaking about something you're so passionate about every day with different people all over the world that are giving you more and more insight about it all over the world. And you're just thriving, right? You're absolutely thriving in your life as a podcaster and truth speaker and guide for many people. And I said this to you the very first time that we sat down, your work is actually really important. And you get that validation constantly from people who watch your podcast and say, my God, you're really helping me go down this path and getting alignment, getting truth, getting peace in my life. And obviously it just keeps coming back to the same thing. It's beautiful.
Appreciate that, man. And I appreciate you sharing that. You know my journey. I think it's very similar in that sense, and I think it's also part of something bigger that I don't think we necessarily really understand. But when I think about, the hardest money to ever exist, plus AI coming up, plus, decentralized media and this spiritual development or the journeys that many people are going on, I'm thinking like, could this be like a new renaissance? Like a lot of things a lot of developments are converging.
You mentioned a second renaissance, and I think you're absolutely right. Imagine a world where everybody is doing something that they're passionate about. Imagine what sort of a world that would become. I mean, You're doing it, I'm doing it. And, we're very fortunate because Bitcoin allows us to do so, right? It gives you that element of freedom. If you have a money that isn't constantly being debased, where the the purchasing power increases every year rather than decreases every year, it gives you more and more stability, more and more peace, less and less anxiety in your life about being able to feed your family and provide for your children. Like, this is less and less of a concern. And so imagine that everybody is on that trajectory, and suddenly everybody is able to focus on what they're passionate about. And we're coming to a time where that's important, because automation, robotics, AI, all combined means that the crap jobs are going to be done by robots. And I'll never forget when I worked in Japan, the depopulation problem or declining population problem was always talked about in terms of how they're going to deal with it in the economy, because they have such strict immigration laws in Japan that, the idea of having any level of worker replacement was problematic. And this was 15 years ago. I remember I think it was the economic minister said, well, robots are going to solve all our problems, because they're going to do all the jobs that the Japanese don't want to do. And, looking after old people, exoskeletons, and helping old people being autonomous much longer into their old age, these types of things. And we're now at a point in history where this is all realizable. Like, robotics is moving fast enough. Obviously, I'm sure you watch those Boston Dynamics videos of every year they're releasing the new robot that can do absolutely anything. And you combine that with AI, and, when the shitty jobs don't need to be done anymore. And so people can pursue their passion.
Yeah.
And that is perfectly timed with a hard money. It does make you wonder again about the timing of all of this. And it just seems very fortuitous, let's say.
I think we both agree that Bitcoin, as a way to save your wealth and basically buying, quote unquote, time and space to try something, actually gives you a cushion to fail. Like, it allows you to spend 6 months doing something, then fail, and then having nothing to worry about. Mm-hmm. And I think that is true now with Bitcoin, but it will be more apparent and necessary in this age of AI abundance, where you are actually forced to think about, okay, what am I going to do now, right? Like, I do believe there will be an abundance in the sense that, homes will be cheaper to create, and food, and blah, blah, blah. So there will be like a base layer of how these basic things are provided to people. But then again, like, what are you taking out of life? So I think it will actually increase the appreciation of life. It will invite people to go more on that spiritual path, and then having a money that actually enables you to try different things and fail at different things to then find your path. Yeah, I hope that doesn't sound too much like a utopia, but I really believe in it. Like, I think that is a really great outlook on the future, and I'm happy to hold on to that.
Yeah, but I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it gives you more time because the money's appreciating, but counter of that, the money's not being stolen from. So you're not rushing and rushing and rushing. Plus, you combine all of that with the increased productivity of AI. And you look at what's happening on Bitcoin Twitter. People talk about their diet, their health, looking after their kids properly, being a good parent, right? All of these things that require time that the fiat system steals from you. Like, you see it all the time where people are rushing around. They're trying to run 2 jobs to survive, to be able to feed the kids. Whereas the dialogue on Twitter is about, how you end up being a better parent, how you end up investing better in your health, taking the time, because Bitcoiners inevitably are getting their time back. And I think, as I said before, it's just remarkably fortuitous timing that this is all the Bitcoin has been given to us. And that's a different subject about how it turned up here. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin has been given to us at a time where productivity gains are being given across the board. And I think in the same way that if you think about a zombie company that has been there just sort of ticking along, keeping the employees employed, it's the same as a single employee, doing his boring, mundane work day to day just to keep the food on the table, just to keep, if he moves his savings to a Bitcoin standard rather than a fiat standard, going to suddenly transform his own outcomes in the same way it would transform the outcomes of a zombie company. These two things are, you can replicate it on an individual level as well as you can on a corporate level.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that, it's funny. The book Sapiens was the book that got me into Bitcoin originally in 2017.
Really?
When I was
wow.
Yeah. When I was reading about it, and I thought the ideas of this guy, Val Harari, were very interesting. Like, this was a way to see what technology was going to do to our future. He kept talking about this technology, Bitcoin. And so I was like, okay, why is he talking about this thing that I always assumed was a scam on the internet? That's a different story. My point being,
he has different views now,
Yeah, well, he's got a bit too much alignment with the World Economic Forum. And so as a result, things have become a bit polluted. But I think that he talks about these useless eaters, or this portion of the population that is going to become completely useless because of robotics and AI. But imagine that portion of the population, rather than just becoming mouths that we have to feed and give attention to video games with, or take their attention with video games and drugs, which is what he proposes as the solution in the book. Drugs and video games is the solution for the billions of people that are going to be on. I mean, it's a horrible thought. It's dystopian in every aspect. So imagine that rather than going down this path of drugs and video games, you transition these people into Bitcoin. They become powered on an individual sovereign level by Bitcoin, and therefore have high agency, are able to say, okay, this is what I want to do with my life, rather than sit there and do this very boring, mundane job that's now going to be replaced by a robot. Actually, they're being empowered. And that is back to the future you mentioned of this this renaissance, where suddenly you're able to just tap into all of human creativity, human consciousness, because everybody is focused on their passion and what they're aligned with. And then that leads to just much more beautiful outcomes for the planet.
I 100% agree. And I think maybe to add to that, it doesn't matter what that is, right? So if more people start creating art or figuring out how to make the best bread, or, whatever, it doesn't matter what it is, right? As long as we give or enable people to actually find that thing, and that the monetary reward becomes less important than it is now, so that people actually feel fulfilled with what they spend their time and energy on, right? And yeah,
well, that's a good point. Like, no one in their right mind who is focused on making sure that they secure a future for their kids is going to go, I'm going to spend my life perfecting this particular type of bread.
Exactly.
They're just not going to do it, because bread is subsidized, through, all the various different ingredients by the governments that are interfering with the supply chain. And therefore, bread is, put at a price which is going to be always affordable for no matter how much they debase the fiat currency, right? It's all part of the whole game, is debasement of the cost of food, debasement of the currency. So people don't really notice what's happening with the currency. But imagine that everything moves towards free market, and you then, on a coin standard for your own sovereign being, can say, actually, I want to, make this perfect bread in the way that you often do see it in Japan, which is, by the way, has been deflationary environment for 20 years. You have people that focus on ridiculous areas of passion. There are shops in Japan where you can buy carved ice for a glass of whiskey, for example.
Yeah. But that's exactly the point. This is the point, right? Like, it doesn't matter what you do. Just hone your craft.
But exactly. And a deflationary environment actually empowers that much more, because the money isn't stealing from you constantly.
Yeah. All right. I have two questions to wrap it up. So you are into Bitcoin now every day. We chat almost every day. We send each other stuff. Like, you are into it as much as I am. What is the most recent bullish development that you think people should pay attention to? And maybe to add to that, what do you also think could be a big hurdle for widespread Bitcoin adoption?
It really is the corporate level adoption. I think there was a rumor out there, which I find very believable, that Nintendo are now looking at buying Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And they have, I think, $14 billion on the balance sheet. So for me, that would be very interesting, because Nintendo is a very much admired company in Japan. So, Metaplanet, no disrespect to what Simon and Dylan are doing, but they're not a very well-known company in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
If someone like Nintendo did it, that would shake boardrooms across Japan. And Japan is the second largest stock market in the world. So
probably the most famous Japanese company.
Yeah, it's up
in
there.
The world.
It's up there. And they've always been very innovative.
Yeah.
So they're always ready to do different things and make moves that are potentially questionable initially. So I think that would be huge. I think, we've kind of let it float by that Bitcoin Strategic Reserve was announced by the United States. I think that's absolutely massive. And I think that means that every single sovereign nation out there is having to think about, at least, what Bitcoin is, understand Bitcoin, have people like you or me or various others come in and present as to how Bitcoin works and what they're missing and why the US would even consider such a ridiculous proposal. And so I think, that is a very significant moment. And, I think I've said this to you before, but we're going to look back at this period in time and say, oh my God, it was so obvious. Bitcoin below 100,000 with all of this stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, you just got to buy it. You just got to buy it as much as you can now. That's my view. Sorry, it's not financial advice.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for another great conversation. I think people will enjoy this, and we'll see each other soon. Thanks, man.
Very soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for a next episode. Bye.